So it was founded in 1993 by Bill Clinton. And Curtis, our boss, Will Marshall, was instrumental in envisioning this idea in the late 1980s. So today, the AmeriCorps budget is about $1.3 billion. It supports 75,000 young people. And when you include senior volunteers, which is also part of the program, that totals up to 200,000 people in nearly 35,000 locations. There are three primary branches to AmeriCorps. First, there's VISTA, which is an anti-poverty program that was founded by Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. There's the National Civilian Community Corps, which is a residential program that assigns members to community service programs in areas like disaster preparedness and environmental conservation. And then the rest of the money, the bulk of the money, goes to local and national organizations and through a number of public-private partnerships with groups that many of your listeners may know: Teach for America, Habitat for Humanity, City Year, Boys and Girls Clubs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So there are six key areas that they fund. AmeriCorps funds disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environment, healthy futures, and veterans and military families. Now, importantly for this audience, about half the money goes to education programs. So if you sign up to be an AmeriCorps member, you typically work for 10 to 12 months. You might help repair homes after disasters, tutor students, staff food banks, assist seniors or veterans or those struggling with health challenges. Typically, young people are provided a stipend of $18,000 a year and then get $7,400 towards payment for college or reducing your student debt if you've already gone through college. You also get health care and health insurance and child care. So I think the most important thing, just to close up, is that you're given a chance to do something for your country. Will Marshall, who I mentioned earlier, said when AmeriCorps was created, Bill Clinton would go to the AmeriCorps gatherings of members, and there was just tremendous enthusiasm because no one had ever asked them to do something for their country, and they wanted to do that. And Clinton himself said AmeriCorps was one of his proudest achievements as president. So it's a very special program.
Thank you so much. And I'll add, I myself at a young age decided to join a similar program, the United States Peace Corps, and travel to South Africa. And a lot of the benefits that you are all highlighting here, that you highlighted, Rick, are similar to the international version people often associate with that. And so this program is so important to young people who volunteer, but just as important to those organizations that are lucky enough to have one of those volunteers in their space. Termination of AmeriCorps funding shuttered more than 1,000 programs and prematurely ended service of over 32,000 AmeriCorps members. AmeriCorps grants, they primarily focus on critical community services such as mentoring, tutoring, food insecurity, homelessness, public safety, social isolation, mental health, and other issues that impact every state and community. Particularly on today's conversation, we want to talk about how those cuts, those 32,000 AmeriCorps members, 1,000 program cuts, are impacting K-12 education. And we have someone who was personally impacted by that. So Tasha, first and foremost, let's talk about Legends for those who may not be familiar. Tell us about Legends, and what makes it special.
Thank you, and good afternoon, gentlemen. When I was a principal in the District of Columbia, I was so fortunate to have a City Year Core team support my work. And as someone who had worked in New York State, Maryland, Cheektowaga, having a near peer as a secret weapon, if you will, in the recipe to what makes schools particularly effective It was through the AmeriCorps. As I stepped away from my principalship and founded Legends Charter School, I didn't know what I would do running a school without their presence. And so I reached out to City Year DC, and at which point they said, this is based on state and territory. And so you'll have to write a grant to create what you want in this space, and we're happy to help you. After 2 years of going for this grant, there was the funniest story. They called and said, "Honey, it just doesn't seem like you're going anywhere. So you're invited into the fold. Here, how this is going to work for us." And we were able to sufficiently budget enough for a core team of 24. So Legends serving 900 scholars. It was very important for us in executing our model to have two adults in the foundational supports around guided reading and guided math, K through 3. The lift on teachers is too heavy. And when you have near peers who can say the things that teachers can say just a little bit cooler, can translate to parents in a way that's just a little bit smoother, it is actually a blessing to our community. And one of the things that is personally important to me in reaching the young people who are serve at our site between 18 and 24 is particularly around the passion around our mission and saying to our young people, I want you to be able to serve in your local community and your country and find purpose and passion. And I firmly believe that when you find the nexus between purpose, passion, and vocation, it's no wonder that we've been able to use our AmeriCorps as a pipeline for future teachers because they come in and they find their voice, they find a love, and they find where they can really add value. And so on that August 25th, it was literally about 10 p.m. I received a phone call from our AmeriCorps division, and they said, Atasha, we have some really bad news to talk to you about, and that your funding is going to be cut for your 24 fellows effective immediately. And so I was actually so shocked to think that that was the news that they would render on that night. I thought for sure this would be a pre-call to say this is certainly coming so we could prepare a way to off-ramp our young people because these young people gave their lives. They are so brilliant, they're so talented, and they could literally do anything they want to do, but they decided to pause on their plans just to give service a shot. And in return, our government decided, just like you stated, Curtis, without any reason that this wasn't aligned with the priority. I don't know what country they were talking about, and I don't know what's more important than the grooming and development of our young people. And so at Legends, our AmeriCorps fellows, they support with the ABCs. And we equate those ABCs to attendance, academics, behavior, and culture. Because we know for sure if you can't see it, it's likely that you're not going to be it. But more importantly, if you can't name it, then it's also so far out of your reach. And so when we talk about developing an archetype for our scholars around how they see themselves as an academician, who can walk in the delights of their own interest and their passion very early on, we create a legion of future leaders. And what we say about our legends is that that is who they are and what they will be. Because if you pay attention closely enough to both our scholars in the K-8 space and our near peers 18 to 24, our future is bright if we can get out the way. They are some of the most brilliant young people who have a clear voice and purpose for what we do. And so at a Legends Charter School, particularly coming out of COVID, it was a wonderful entree, even though COVID gave us so many bruises and scars, because you have parents who are unfamiliar with technology, and the fellows were able to come in and jump into a space. We had to transpose our brick and mortar school design into a COVID Teams school enterprise. And so you had grandmas who were custodians who didn't know how to work a mouse, who didn't know how to set up Teams. But I tell you, those young people found utilitarianism at a height where they were of value. We literally could not do school without them. And so they're walking a little taller, they're standing a little firmer and knowing, honey, I make a difference. And so the thing that stands out to me about our particular core team when we pulled them in on that Monday, after there was like a solemnity around what occurred and how they were handled, they clutched themselves with such pride and integrity and said, it doesn't matter, Miss Natasha. We're going to stay with you to the end of the year. and we'll figure out how to make this up at another time because we have 6 weeks left in our school year and we can't abandon the kids. Who thinks that this is okay? And so, luckily and intentionally, we're very conservative and we were able to afford to keep our service members on and extend their term so that they could, more importantly, earn and take advantage of the scholarship. They get a Siegel scholarship when they maintain or hit their 1,700 hours of service. And our young people are committed to their dreams. But more importantly, we have so many who are going back to school to come back and be a part of our faculty and staff at Legends Charter School. So I couldn't be more proud of what this actual tragedy showed. And what I mean by that specifically, it aroused the consciousness of our young people for them to say, whoever's in charge, they got this wrong, and they're paying closer attention. Our young people are saying, wait, what? Okay, so now my voice does need to be amplified a little bit more. So, jokes on anyone who did not take the care and continually underestimates our young people because they are fired up and ready to claim their seat at whatever table will prevent this from happening again.
Can you talk a little bit more about what, on a day-to-day basis, AmeriCorps volunteers were doing in the Legend Public Charter School? How are they
Oh,
serving students? How are they supporting staff?
yes, yes, yes. So our fellows know they know the academics of the school backwards and forwards. And so when we talk about intentionality, support to students, they know how to integrate and do small group. And so they work side by side with their teacher. More importantly, when you talk about creating culture, it's our fellows who are out front singing welcome songs to our students in the morning. It's our fellows who are in the hallway giving high five and saying, come on, baby, you can get to class on time. Hey, what do you need? When a student is in between talking to their mom or their parent or even a counselor at school with whatever issue it may be, those fellows, they complete the circle of support in any way, shape, or form that they can. And so when I truly say they're indispensable and they take on a little bit of everybody's role in the school to offer a full continuum of support, that's what they do. They do the things that nobody else wants to do.
No, thank you so much. That's outstanding. I imagine those young people are going to remember those volunteers long after they're gone. But that connection is incredibly important. Um, we have a survey question we want to ask folks, and this kind of gets into a question that could be a little controversial, but we'll speak to our topic today, which is whether you think national service, like AmeriCorps, like Peace Corps, and others, should be mandatory. That Americans should be required to do this. After high school or even after college. This is not uncommon in other countries that actually require this. We want to get a feel for those who think this should be mandatory, and we'll show you the results a little later. Before we get into that particular survey, I do want to get to our results of our first survey, which is who's in the audience. And so we're gonna show that particular result to see, how many of you all are teachers, how many of you all are parents, how many of you all are journalists. And so if you see here, about a third of you all are advocates, people who are really pushing for education reform. And then we have a few educators in the room as second largest group. But again, journalists, policymakers, parents, thank you all so much for joining us. Rick, I want to come back to you. And this speaks to national service, but also a poll that was done. So a poll was conducted by Change Research of more than 2,300 Americans of all ages and political affiliations about mandating national service. 77%, three quarters of respondents, including the majority of both Democrats and Republicans, said they strongly or somewhat support Congress passing legislation that would expand national service opportunities such as AmeriCorps and Peace Corps. So people understand the impact this is having on communities, but also on those who volunteer. Before we get into that, Rick, talk about the history of sort of national service in this country. You have a we mentioned earlier, you have a child who's sort of served in other capacities around the world. Talk about your project, but more importantly, the role of national service in this country and why people do it.
Yeah, well, I will, but I first want to say, Tasha, that was so moving. Your description of hearing the news and the poise and dignity with which your AmeriCorps members persevered. So that's just so heartening. And a great question about the history, Curtis. So volunteerism has always been an important part of American culture, and going back to the early 19th century, de Tocqueville talks about that being an aspect of America that's particularly pronounced. Organized national service really came out of John F. Kennedy's famous, 1961 inaugural address: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And in the early 1960s, John Kennedy created Peace Corps that you were a part of, Curtis, and allows young people to move abroad for a couple of years and assist people in other countries with a variety of projects. And shortly after the Peace Corps was launched, John Kennedy asked his brother, Robert, who's happens to be a hero of mine, Robert Kennedy Sr., I emphasize these days. Bobby Kennedy Sr. Was chaired, John Kennedy asked him to chair a committee to look into the creation of basically a domestic Peace Corps. That's what they were calling it. And then after John Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson stepped up and created the Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program, in 1964. And that is an important program, but about a quarter century later, there were still only a couple thousand people participating in VISTA. So it was a very, very small program. But the idea of creating something bigger was stirring. And Curtis, our colleague, Will Marshall and Charles Moscos issued a really important report in 1988 for the Democratic Leadership Council that called for the creation of a civilian corps that would be much larger than VISTA and make national service really a civic rite of passage for young people. And in 1989, legislation was offered by Senator Sam Nunn, my old boss, Chuck Robb, and others to create a 800,000 member civilian corps. Unfortunately, it got watered down and ended up as a demonstration project. But a few years later, Bill Clinton was elected president. In 1993, he and Congress established the AmeriCorps that we have today.
Thank you so much. I mean, again, this history of service, and I imagine some of you all in the audience have family members who serve military service as well. And so there is a similar ethos amongst a lot of us, particularly folks I've served with in the Peace Corps, around that service to your country, but also to those who you serve. We can also talk about, I mean, this idea of mandatory national service, which again is not universally supported, but one I think is up for a conversation, is not uncommon in other countries. Places like Nigeria, Israel, mandate that young people serve, and in particular serve in communities that are not similar to their own. So if you live in a rural area, serving in an urban area and vice versa, serving in other religious groups, particularly Nigeria, where you're leaving your particular state, going to another state where you may meet someone and understand another, community who may have a different religious background or speak a different language. So talk about particularly, you think, the impact of not just mandating national service, but how volunteers are distributed throughout spaces in order to sort of build up what the particular mission of the organization was in the first place.
Yeah. And I imagine we'll get into that later as well, that, this bridge building function of service programs like AmeriCorps is central. We have people coming from all corners of the world to the United States. And so it's so important that we learn to get along with people of different backgrounds, and that can be an important component of these programs. So the National Commission on Service identified about 75 or 80 countries now that have the mandatory national service, as you mentioned, Israel, France, Nigeria. These are the types of countries that have said as a matter of public policy, we're going to mandate this. And the poll that you cited, Curtis, I think is fascinating because to get such a high level of support for mandatory service is in some ways kind of surprising in a country like ours where no one wants to be told what to do. We put a lot of emphasis on individualism and not being mandated to do anything. But clearly, the polling suggests there's an appetite for more. And to me, it suggests there may be a political opening to greatly expand national service. Not necessarily at the mandatory level, but scale it up on a volunteer basis. I mean, imagine what would happen if we went from the 75,000 AmeriCorps members today up to that original Democratic Leadership Council goal of 800,000. It would transform the country and help Tasha and her colleagues do an even better job, and it could really be transformative. And so I'm encouraged by the poll that was done nationally, finding such strong support for the concept of national service. And I guess we'll find out what the our group here thinks in a little bit.
So, Curtis, if I can reply, and Rick, I suspect, so I have two college-age children, 24, 21, and here's what I'll say. If I was a respondent, I would say they should probably go and serve somewhere else if they think that being in my house is tough sometimes. So number one, I would say I believe it's mandatory. So in jest, but they would probably be aligned with that response. And I understand, Curtis, I think why you say that could be a controversial question because when you said it, it landed on me. I'm Afro-Boricua, and at this point in my life, you're not telling me to do anything. My whole life being here in the United States is a service, and I've decided to double down on my public service in light of, in spite of, how my family's origin came to be here. What I do say though is having an abroad experience in my house has been transformative because I can't make my kids feel the pain of my lived experience, even in a small town like Buffalo, New York, where segregation was among the highest in our nation. The microaggressions that I lived and endured that helped to shape my exterior today. I can't make my kids understand why I'm so passionate about my purpose in life and the way I walk, the way I do. But when my daughter went to spend a semester or so, 6 months in Colombia, and she was able to see how other Afro-Indigenous people lived because of politics and because of policy, that stirred something in her that my experience in Buffalo would never have been able to do. And so she was ignited on a very personal and organic level to the injustices that just don't live here in our backyard, but that other brown and black people experience. Her involvement in those overseas organizations have left her with a tribe around the world. And when they coalesce and figure out what problem do we want to attempt to solve today, we're talking about a new level of coalescing. We're talking about a thought partnership that our binary political system isn't ready for. And so, for that reason alone, when we talk about a catalyst, we talk about incubating change makers who can identify similar issues across continents with themes that run through political systems that aim to keep a particular populace subjugated. We have bigger things to look forward to, is what I would say. So, expanding the opportunity for young people to look behind the veil, not just pointing to them to say you should do this for yourself because it would help you grow, but instead saying you have a special gift that only you can use to elevate where we're at. We're stuck and you're up next. What do you bring to this solution? So I think the reframing of how brilliant they are and their potential is against a problem versus, hey, listen, you need to serve. It's in the messaging that will get people back into service and thinking more globally about how we can collectively change not just our local sites, but how can we scale global transformation? And I think that that is really the opportunity that's yet been uncovered in service.
No, thank you for saying that. And I think there's always a long history of those folks who started in service in this capacity and have gone on to do amazing things in elected office, in public
Hmm.
service, in nonprofit spaces, and others that people sort of tout as I got my first taste of this in this space. And to your point, the challenge, but also the platform to say, I may not be from where a lot of even my fellow volunteers are, but I'm here now, and I got here, and we're gonna go together. I do, to Rick's point, I do want to bring up the results. You know, what percentage of you all think that it should be mandatory? And so we want to hear from you all about this. And so we say only about 38% say yes, and 62% said no. And so there you go, Rick. I mean, it's not again as clear cut, and there's a lot of nuance behind this as well, because public service oftentimes you're not being compensated at a level you probably would in the marketplace, but there are also, I think, return on investments that come. And I want to talk about one now. I mean, according to AmeriCorps and their programs, they've done some research, particularly on the impact of the resources that go towards AmeriCorps. And their studies show that there's a $34, excuse me, return on the investment for every dollar invested in AmeriCorps. So those AmeriCorps volunteers that are being placed, that are serving, they're saving money. They're saving program and grantees like Atasha money and others who are benefiting from their service. So Rick, talk about what the benefits of national service are to America that go beyond the actual service they provide to the grantees. You talk about a lot of this in your project. What are some of the things that I think people should think about as they're thinking about national service that go beyond just the service that those volunteers provide?
Yeah. Well, I think the most tangible benefits come from those services that are provided, and Natasha's been talking about that. They're so enormously important. John McCain was opposed to national service requirements when Bill Clinton first suggested it, or national service programs, because he said he wanted people just to kind of volunteer on their own. He thought this would displace volunteers, but it's done the opposite. The reason you got that return on investment is because at a let's take a Habitat for Humanity example. You have people who are getting all the materials ready so that other volunteers can come in and help. They're teaching volunteers how to hang drywall. I mean, they're able to have an exponential effect because there are all these people who aren't being paid anything who do volunteer. So that facilitates more volunteering. That's part of the benefit. But there are, we think of this in terms of education as educating the students, but there are two really important benefits where the AmeriCorps members themselves are being educated. The first has to do with instilling this ethos of national service and civic obligation. That's unusual. That's an unusual aspect about AmeriCorps. It's not just another social service program. It's a program that's really emphasizing the commitment to country. And we see patriotism is declining in America, especially among young people. Only 18% of young people are extremely proud of America compared with older Americans. And, on some level, you can understand what they're saying with the national situation in Washington today. But at the same time, it's important to instill that obligation to country, and AmeriCorps helps do that. It's especially important because there are very few public schools that are requiring community service and this sense of giving back. My kids grew up in Maryland, and I know, Tasha, you and Curtis are in Maryland. And so, we kind of take it for granted. In Maryland, in order graduate from high school, you have to do community service. It's mandated by the state, and it has enormous benefits for students, but that's very unusual. And so that's why, if our public schools nationally are not doing this, AmeriCorps can play that role. And the other piece is which we've touched on a little bit, is social cohesion. Cross lines of race and class and ideology, because AmeriCorps has the ability to bring people of different backgrounds together, kind of like the U.S. military. It has that capacity to provide kind of the solvent necessary for Americans to see what they have in common around a unity of purpose. It's enormously important. Fragmentation is on the rise. Our public schools are increasingly segregated by race and by economic status. And we're deeply fractured politically as well. Back in 1960, only about 5% of Americans said that they would be upset if their kid married someone from a different political party. Today, it's 45% among Democrats and 35% among Republicans who
Rick,
voice
I just want to clarify, did you say political party or race?
political party.
Oh God, okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, on race, I think we've hopefully moved forward since
I was holding tone too.
loving. We still had those laws forbidding interracial marriage. So moving forward on in terms of racial intermarriage, moving backwards in terms of political intermarriage. So AmeriCorps helps counter these trends. There's an American University professor, Dana Fisher, who said, our democracy is made up of reciprocal ties between and among all of us, and AmeriCorps strengthens those ties. So that's important. The last thing I'll mention is politically, this is important to emphasize and underline, because Republicans are often opposed to social service programs. They often support those cuts. But this is, to the extent that this program also boosts patriotism, it can be appealing to Republicans. And I was heartened that I opened up the Washington Post one day, and it was Representative Don Bacon, who's a Republican from Nebraska, who wrote a wonderful op-ed in support of AmeriCorps and talked about some of these themes of national purpose and national unity.
Natasha, to talk about ROI, return on investment, I think it seems to me, just based on my research, that it would hit a school like Legends differently, because as a public charter school, which is authorized by the Prince George's County Public Schools, that you all receive less funding than a traditional public school, just based off of policy and sometimes, sadly, politics related to public charter schools. And so, as a public charter school who receives less funding, how do cuts to the AmeriCorps core members who support your school impact your bottom line and your budget as a public school serving students?
So let me say this. So for the average cost for a teacher aide or paraprofessional is about $35,000 to $40,000 for one person, and that's not including the fringe and benefits and whatever benefits come from being a part of a collective bargaining organization. So if we just did the math on the high end to say 40,000 times 25 people, that fiscal note is heavy. And that comes with a lot of restrictions, if you will. Inversely, my fiscal note, based on a reimbursable grant of almost $2 million, makes it affordable for me to offer this high level of support while also carefully curating a playlist that supports where our members are at. Based on their living allowance, our young people need to know and often come in, it's not surprising, that the difference between what you gross and what you net. How do you balance a budget? What does this mean for the life you can afford? This is oftentimes the first moment where the young people understand and can really think about what it costs to live and more. And so it's at this moment where they're situated between who they are and what they want to be, and realizing in that gap year, there's a lot that they need to get tended to, understand, open up so that they can make the next move. And so we are a bridge of support as they're going into their destiny. And so not exactly a paid internship. However, the amount of support and pouring in that we do to groom and develop our young people, there's no cost that I could put on that that would even mean anything because it's a labor of love, number one. But number two, we wouldn't be able to afford this amount of support if we had to go at it alone. And so there are different models in the grant that allow for us to grow into larger teams. And also, if I could say, there are different levels of stability and strength in different organizations. So while Legends is upwards of a $15 million organization and the impact is at such a, just like Rick said, there are Vista and AmeriCorps agencies that work in very nuanced neighborhoods, and it's not just being able to afford the AmeriCorps, Curtis. It is the infrastructure that you need to support payroll, that you need to do to hire, that even sometimes doesn't allow for you to get into the sandbox to offer this service. What I'll say is AmeriCorps does an amazing job, especially our Maryland team. When I tell you you wouldn't know if the organization was small, medium, large. They offer you a high level of support and service because ultimately they want to see you be successful because they believe in the power of your purpose and what you're trying to do in your local communities. And so beyond the fiscal note of what it might cost me as an employer, if you will, the halo effect and the unquantified dollar amount of support that goes into the foundations of people's HR system and the framework for accountability. I don't know if they put a proper dollar amount on that level of support because it helps also mature and cultivate and incubate powerful startup companies across our state. And so that should not be overlooked.
No, thank you. I mean, it's again, it gets deep, folks. Folks who are listening in, there's so many connections, and some of you, may be supporting organizations that are being supported by AmeriCorps volunteers. Just didn't know it. I will tell you, Atasha, I was kind of taken aback when I realized how many volunteers you had and how they were working in your school. Um, and so I think again, when you cut these things, you kind of you will understand you kind of take them for granted until they're cut, and then you realize, wow, they were such an important part. We want to go back out to the audience, those who are listening in, and we want to ask you a question. We want to put you in the shoes of Atasha James and ask you if you ran an organization, a school like Atasha's, and you were able to get a AmeriCorps volunteer. How do you think they could best be used? And so, do you think whether it be through reading education, through math education, music and art, STEM education, civic education, artificial intelligence, how would you use a AmeriCorps volunteer if you had them in a school that you ran? We want
So
to hear.
I'll give the audience some tips too, Curtis. Let me tell you. So we have a group that was not there prior to Coach. They call themselves the Elite Diamonds, and we had one core member who dance was her passion. She said, "CEO James, can we do a dance club?" Absolutely. They're an award-winning troupe now. We had another young gentleman who videography and TV production was his jam. And he asked, can I run the TV program here? I'll create it and we'll do this. Yes, we had another core member who political agency and grassroots movement was an interest of hers. And she said, can I support our student government here? I could go on and on. There's one who loved crocheting and knitting. She created an entire club around crocheting and knitting. And you see these young people looking like old ladies together with their juice boxes after school, sitting and crocheting together. There's no bounds, if you ask me. It just depends on who is in the seat and how willing they are to share themselves. And that's what really makes it. On paper, they interviewed, they showed us, okay, you have the requisite skills to come in, you have the heart and mind of service. But then once they come in and you get to unlock their entire genius and the gifts that they unpack, who knows what's possible? This group was I'm so fond of this particular group. Line dancing, they taught me line dances this year. I can't do that. I do now, but They gave us everything that they had, and I'm forever in debt to this particular group. So I'm interested to see what the audience says, but our group showed up and showed out. So if you have any suggestions that'll push our agenda forward, I'm open.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm going to follow because I'm particularly curious about this experience for those volunteers. And you mentioned that they could potentially be a pipeline into the teaching profession. I'm
Yes.
curious about particularly, how AmeriCorps and other groups can use this as a grow your own strategy. But I want to get into sort of the face of AmeriCorps volunteers because this same Change Research poll reported that 44% of all young people who were polled were interested in serving. And so these are volunteers, these are young people saying, yeah, up to almost half, I want to serve. And that number actually goes up for young people of color. So 60% of people of color said, I want to serve. At the same time, research and data shows that particularly Peace Corps do not do a really good job of recruiting minorities. And in my case, African American men. I was the only African American male Peace Corps volunteer out of 100 serving in South Africa in the early 2000s when I was there. AmeriCorps does a little better, but particularly African American AmeriCorps volunteers, this is some research that have been done, have said that to experience the programs differently than their white counterparts, in part because of financial instability, job readiness skills, and also just navigating the program culture of being an AmeriCorps volunteer and being a minority and maybe even from a low-income community. So, Tasha, talk a little bit about, as a school leader of a school of predominantly Black students, how important is it, do you think, that AmeriCorps is diverse and representative of America, but also representative of your student body?
Um, so coming into the space with my HR cap on, I have lots of opinions on the barriers, fences in place that just knock out an entire group of people who are interested, period. And so when we talk to our team about opening up every gate, every fence, and really asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's okay to say, I'm not sure yet. We want to be more curious. We ask, and we find ourselves more drawn to folks who actually don't know because therein lies the opportunity. And we ask them, will you give us a chance? Are you open to doing different rotations on different arms? Because about November or so, we see the groups move just like you would in like any group. There used to have some who lean towards they want to learn more about operations. They like the structure, they like the dependability that goes into that. But then we also strategically say, if you ever get the urge and you want to become a teacher or you want to join education, we leave it very open-ended. We invite them in that space. So it's kind of set on the table. And once we see it, our team invites you in and says, are you interested in just seeing how this feels? Can we develop this in you? And there are some people who are like, this was the best thing since sliced bread. Count me in. How do I sign up for school? And there are others who say, well, I don't know yet. Can I have an experience with the older students? I don't know yet. May I have an experience in reading? May I have an experience here? And we're open to that. And we open the opportunity for them to find their place and the right fit. This is particularly important before they get out into the job market. And inside of their year of service, we actually work with our fellows to learn how to dress for particular activities. We do formal dining, we do formal speaking, we do resume building, we do financial planning. And so when they leave there, regardless of what pathway they pick, we know that we have done our best to prepare them. And that includes my own personal reading list. So minimally, the kids are leaving having read James Baldwin and other authors that they can take with them because we tell them, like, you are the rage against the machine and we're counting on you. And so we're intentional about the pressure that we put on them to ignite their drive to disrupt. We name them as disruptors, and more importantly, we invite them in and let them know that post the sunset of their service day, that Legends will always be a home for them. And we literally, Curtis, this is our third year. We have students and core members who we say, you can't come back this year, guys, unless you're going to work for us. Because when they leave, they say, I'm out in the world now. and it's not as warm, and I don't have that same connection. And so coming back to it, I think we just have to really control alt delete the traditional way in which we invite people into our workforce and see it more as a team force and a family force that is committed to growth and development. Because it's not a linear trajectory to when we can, oh, now you're ready. Life is going to life, and unless you have a system of support to help you endure and bounce back when life happens, that's how we find people left behind. That's how we find people left in the gap and feel isolated and alone. And so, the more that we can open the ways that we see giftedness in other people, the better off we will be. And that's what we do exceptionally well at Legends Charter School.
Thank you. That's well said. Rick, I mean, you've written about this. Your book Class Matters talks about class diversity as a way to get to racial diversity. We've talked offline about the AmeriCorps diversity numbers along race, but not around income. And so I'm curious, what lessons from the work that you're doing with your project and how you're looking to diversify higher education can national service programs like AmeriCorps and in Peace Corps help to recruit volunteers to ensure they reflect the diversity of America by race and by class?
This is a great question. I mean, if these programs are meant to build bridges, they've got to be diverse. I draw a distinction between Peace Corps and AmeriCorps here. I mean, Peace Corps has a long way to go. It tends to be more privileged Americans, more likely to be white and Asian rather than Black or Hispanic. 98% of Peace Corps volunteers are college educated. So right there, 3/4, I'm sorry, 3/5 of the country is not part of that program. So I think Peace Corps could do a number of things. I mean, certainly to the extent that they stay with that college model, spending more time recruiting at HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. The Supreme Court has made it tricky to select by race, but you could give extra consideration to economically disadvantaged applicants of all races, disproportionate share of whom will be Black and Hispanic, and that's perfectly legal to do. AmeriCorps is doing a better job. Actually, Black people are overrepresented by about 10 percentage points, and whites are underrepresented by 14 percentage points. In terms of economic diversity, though, like you asked, Curtis, it is a more privileged group at AmeriCorps. So 44% of the mothers of AmeriCorps members have bachelor's degrees compared to 32% overall, according to the data AmeriCorps presents. So 12-point underrepresentation. Having that diversity is just the first step. Then you want to make sure that you're conscious and intentional about garnering the benefits of diversity. And programs like City Year are intentional about assignments. And I love your example in Nigeria, Curtis, where you're putting people in positions where they may at first feel uncomfortable, but then they can eventually come to learn, a common humanity. There's some, finally, I'll end by saying there is some research on this question, and a recent study found that most AmeriCorps members are interacting with people of different races, and they also express greater confidence in navigating those lines of difference than before they started the program.
No, thank you. I guess there's so much here and so much opportunity that I think this needs to be our priority particularly at the national level, from our leaders, where we are in this country. We need it more than ever. Let's check out those survey results. Let's see what folks are saying they would use. So do we have the answers there? I believe it was sort of fill in the blank. I will come up again. But there are some folks who, at least in the chat, have mentioned, Charlotte Webb mentioned, a number of programs are actually targeting formerly incarcerated individuals, having them work with reentry and higher education.
That's a good one
as well. But yeah, can we pull up those results into they show up as answers? And as we're doing that, we're 5 minutes left. And just for those who have been following this, just as an update on where we are with this. A U.S. district judge granted a temporary block on AmeriCorps' cancellation of grants and early discharge of Corps members, but only for the 24 or so states that sued the administration. So there are states too that were not, part of that case that are not impacted by the temporary block. The order requires the Trump administration to restore AmeriCorps' grant funding to those 24 or so states. At the same time, that same judge did allow for AmeriCorps to proceed with reduction in force of its more than 500 full-time workers. And so there's a reprieve, at least temporarily, for the cuts, but also dismantling of the agency, particularly in Maryland. There was a coming together. Rick, when funding was cut, Maryland raised over $80,000, and that was money with groups like Baltimore Gas and Electric and South Baltimore Gateway Partnership came together. So where do we go from here? For those who are interested in AmeriCorps, interested in public service, national service, you're seeing the federal government downsizing, particularly, and maybe less of a priority for this administration. What are your recommendations? What happens next for national service, in particular, programs like AmeriCorps?
I'll say a couple of things. The first is that states are really leading the way here. It's those 24 states who sued and said these cuts are wrong. And so that was important. And then individual state governors are beginning to step up. So Governor Wes Moore in Maryland has created this service year option, which is drawing on his own experience in the Army. He said, we were different races, different classes, different political parties. Everyone had a common mission, and so he's created that important program. I'd like to see other states do that, and then I always like to think long term during these difficult periods in Washington, and so I think building on state success, you could really ramp up AmeriCorps over the long term. John McCain made this observation. He said, most people know what Peace Corps is. 2/3 of Americans know what Peace Corps is, but very few people know what AmeriCorps is. And so we need to go to scale to really get the program out there and better known than it is today. And doubling down on those missions, instilling civic duty, building bridges, reducing division. And my hope is, I guess, eventually people will become exhausted of the divisiveness of the Trump era so I think the nation will be looking for a new voice that will try to bring us together. And a platform that included national service, I think, would fit the bill perfectly.
Tasha,
Rick, the only thing I'll add on to that is when we received the notification, previous to us being invited into the AmeriCorps portfolio, we were a service year site. And when we went back to service year, they were harmed some way, shape, or form. If I had a wish, there would be a service year has to be the contingency for Maryland minimally in the event that this funding is not restored in the future from the federal level, because it does give us a lane to operate on the state level. And so I just want to underscore the importance of having funding intact for service year if we need to pivot again. The financial implication for me next year is if this funding is not restored, my Corps member would go from 25 to what we can afford locally if we can use service year to a Corps member of 10 or 12. That's a big difference.
No, thank you. Thank you for that final note. And again, to add sort of context to this and what it means, not just sort of from this, this number was cut, these programs, this is impacting young people.
Yes.
Every day. Those young people who are learning how to crochet for the first time, learning to get voice because the volunteer came in, to certain programs, extracurricular activities, and just oftentimes just seeing someone who looks like you or someone you look up to in the classroom for the first time who may, give you a glimpse into your own future is one that is hard to quantify. As we wrap up, I just want to highlight again some of the examples you all said that you all think AmeriCorps volunteers can be helpful in schools. Some of you all said, high impact tutoring, particularly post-COVID, is incredibly important. How volunteers can help young people navigate the between high school and college, that transition, which is incredibly hard. college and career core. I guess this idea of, again, how are you working with young people to get skills, but also, mentorship is incredibly important to young people to help them navigate the world and how they see it. And so we're at time. We want to thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation about what's happening in the news coming out of the federal government, cuts to programs that are impacting programs, but more importantly, helping young people every day who are in schools, but also those Americans who want to dedicate their lives to service. Thank you all who serve. Thank you all who have served, and those who will serve. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Atasha, for joining us today. And thank you for joining us for this edition of the PPI ROS webinar series. Look forward to seeing you all again. Have a great day.